Social justice means applying the law equally to all people, but in practice, that doesn't always happen. I'm John Gonzalez. I'm here with my law partner, Jack DeRora. We practice law, we seek social justice. On this show, we reveal the conflict between the two.
You know, for a while, it was just us in the office over a cup of coffee talking about the news of the day. With social justice issues dominating our culture, our focus became how do we, as lawyers, make a difference?
And now it's not just us. Today we have Gary Daniels, Chief Lobbyist of the ACLU of Ohio, on our show to talk about what we see as a push by conservatives to promote religion in public schools. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Jack, I don't know if I told you about a case I had, and I'm going to take a long walk here, but I'll get back to our subject matter. Okay. So my client is trying to evict somebody that's in their rental home. And the way these people came into the home, and they're very, very nice people, is there was somebody renting from my client, and they sublet, but they didn't want to tell my client. So when they were introduced to my client, they were introduced as an aunt and uncle because family members can stay in the home. Well, the aunt and uncle, the uncle is a pastor and a very, very nice guy. So then we're in depositions to try to establish that they were there under false pretenses. And the response was, in the eyes of the Lord, we're all brothers and sisters. And I said, okay, but you will agree with me that this was dishonest, right? And I couldn't get this guy, and he knew, and I knew, and everybody else knew that it was dishonest to really come out and say that. But I think we see a lot of what is preached about God on Sunday is forgotten about God on Monday.
Sure.
In what we see with people that say, look, I'm a Christian or I'm a pastor. And when I looked at these bills that we're going to talk to Gary Daniels about today, I noticed that the sponsor is a pastor.
Right.
And I think that his religious training and his religious beliefs seem to motivate a lot of what he's doing in the legislature. And I'm not sure it's all consistent with Christian beliefs.
As a general rule, I am always wary of people who wear religion on their sleeves, which is probably an outgrowth of being Catholic, because Catholics don't do that. So as soon as somebody wants to start promoting religion, I get skeptical.
Mm-hmm. Now, very impressive background, and I'm talking about Representative Gary Click, and you know his background, right? Gary, you have to deal with him. Mm-hmm. Is he as impressive as his background would suggest?
Mm-hmm. Well, I haven't dove too deeply into his background other than to know that he is Christian clergy. And quite obviously, that's part of what motivates a fair amount of his legislative action. I don't think he would deny that. I mean, that's not a slam on anybody in particular. Everybody has different backgrounds that they bring with them to the legislature, and many times you can see that manifest itself in what it is that they do and what it is that they pursue in the legislature.
What Mr. Click wants to do, and what we're going to talk about, is they want public school teachers and college professors to talk about the positive influence of Christianity on American history without fear of losing their jobs or being reprimanded. Was that an issue before they decided to pass House Bill 486? Were people being reprimanded and threatened with their job if they talked about American history and religion?
Well, it's, I don't exactly have a finger on the pulse of all of the schools and faculty staff out there across Ohio. We have 600 and some school districts. And then when you start breaking it down by individual schools and individual faculty and teachers, there's going to be some bumps in the road. Quite understandably. There's going to be a little bit of confusion as to where the lines are drawn with regard to religion in schools. But also, these general issues have been around for quite a while, decades, with regard to constitutional law and how the courts have interpreted all of this, all of which boils down essentially to when it comes to religion, government is to remain neutral. They're not supposed to advance religion. They're not supposed to inhibit religion. And so sometimes people wonder, well, am I getting too far into the advancement advanced category or too far into the inhibit category. And so there can be some confusion out there. But there's tons of resources out there for people as to how to navigate religion in schools as an instructor. And so, I think there's general agreement among people, or at least a lot of people, that it's entirely appropriate and sometimes part of a well-rounded education in public school to talk about, for instance, the religious motivations of particular people or particular movements out there. So, you can talk about abolition of slavery in the United States. Many of those people were motivated by their religious beliefs. And so there's certainly nothing wrong about talking about that or discussing it in a public school. But the bill you mentioned, House Bill 486, it really is designed to present Christianity in nothing but a positive light in the schools. It is really, the saying is it's a solution looking for a problem, and indeed it is, because the bill really doesn't proscribe anything. It is completely up to the discretion of the local school district what they want to do in this regard, but schools don't really need the help of Representative Click or House Bill 486. They can navigate this. There's plenty of resources online. There's the Ohio School Boards Association that's had to deal with this for a number of years. So I don't, maybe there's, some hiccups here and there. Certainly sometimes the ACLU of Ohio is dealing with those hiccups when we see them pop up, and that has happened over the years. But by no means is it kind of like a wave or a major problem or something. I think it's just one of these human nature kind of things where, if there's a bunch of people in the mix, there's bound to be a little bit of confusion no matter what the issue is. And so, but it's not the kind of thing whatsoever that necessitates something like House Bill 486. If more education is needed for instructors and staff and faculty, certainly, let's redouble those efforts if it's necessary. But something like 486, it's not so subtly trying to advance not just religion in public schools, but specifically Christianity, although they did recently amend it to add Judeo-Christianity, which is, you see this sometimes in situations like this where they say, well, okay, we better add the Judeo part of this to make it, more acceptable to society at large. We're not just talking about Christianity here. And so this has been the ongoing debate with House Bill 486. Is it needed, and what exactly are we trying via House Bill 486 to get teachers and schools to do in this regard?
I think you used one word, and I think it was important, which was it's a subtle attempt to do something. And I say that because it doesn't require schools to teach about these positive aspects, and it certainly doesn't preclude schools from teaching about the negative aspects of organized religion. But the mere fact that the bill is there and only articulates positive examples shows that I think it is a subtle attempt to push an idea. And I imagine that's at the heart of your concern.
Sure. I went in and testified on behalf of the ACLU of Ohio. We were opponents and remain opponents to House Bill 486. And we made a couple basic points with regard to this legislation. Essentially that you're taking a side or forcing schools to take a side. So that idea that government, and in this case, sometimes it bears worth repeating because sometimes people don't make the connection. But when you're talking about public schools, you're talking about the government. And so they are bound by the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights. And so one of the things when the 486 does again is it talks about the positive impacts of Christianity. So I said, well, if you go in and you pile on all these positive impacts of Christianity, then you're not being neutral here. And there are, just like you have people who engaged in abolition of slavery and those efforts, you had other people who said, well, no, the slavery is something that's approved of essentially by the Bible, and they would use their own faith and the Christian Bible as justification for slavery. And you can repeat this across a bunch of different things: women voting, just a wide range of things where manifest destiny. The idea that the United States is specifically slotted in world history to go out and show the rest of the world, whether by force or not, that the American way is the only way. And there's plenty of religious symbolism and speech and what have you that all went into manifest destiny and that idea. And so I went in and talked about, well, you're talking about the positive part of this, but what about the negative parts of this? Is there any kind of sensitivity towards doing that? And, that, of course, wasn't received so warmly. And then I also talked about what you're also framing this as, and this is something that comes up sometimes in these kinds of discussions, is what is Christianity? Who decides what Christianity is? Because when you're talking about the history of religious liberty and religious problems going back decades and hundreds of years here in the United States, you're really not talking about during that sort of, founding period of the United States. You're not talking about, so much Christians versus Jews, Christians versus Muslims, Christians versus atheists or other non-believers. You're talking about battles and fights, sometimes that would result in laws passed by various states about Christian denominations versus other Christian denominations. And so for one denomination, one person to stand up and say, this is what Christianity is, this is how it should be taught, it totally ignores that, well, among Christians, there's an awful lot of difference about what exactly this means and how Christians should live their lives. But, come in and present that to the committee, and you can tell with some people it's kind of the first time they're ever hearing this sort of thing.
Well, here's another thought. Every time I hear about religion in schools or teaching religion, it seems to me that there are two components, at least, to the word religion. One is just the orthodoxy. And you've pointed out that within Christianity, there are several orthodoxies. But the second is, what effect has organized religion had on history? And those are two separate things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a lot of people, they don't really want to see the nuance or peel back those layers. With this bill and other types of bills, whether it has to do with guns or a wide variety of things, there's also this talk about what is it that the Founding Fathers wanted, as if there is this organization, I don't know, with a capital F for founding and a capital F for fathers, and they all thought the same thing about all of these things, and all of their motives were entirely pure at heart. These weren't politicians, these weren't people trying to one-up each other or, a jockey for, positions or elected office or whatever. No, these were people pure of heart, pure of intention, that all thought the same exact thing about all of these types of issues. And so that's, certainly, doesn't take much reading into the Founding Fathers and what they did and what they said to find, well, that's not exactly true either. Now, you can pull quotes, on this type of thing to support your position or go against somebody else's position, but actions sometimes speak louder than words, and much of what the Founding Fathers did, or the people in charge back then, was also hypocritical and contrary to what exactly they were saying via the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights. And there's, it shouldn't be, again, a huge shock or surprise to point these things out. This is plenty of scholarship and literature and everything about these very problems. But again, I think some people live in such a sort of a bubble, an echo chamber, that when they feel that personally their beliefs are being challenged, when you talk about it in this respect.
Gonzo, let me ask one more question, then I'll turn it over to you. Do you mind? Of course you don't mind.
Of course I do.
Wait a minute. You said something that I didn't quite understand. Are you saying that this bill represents just the personal thoughts of Representative Click, or is this, as I see it, part of a larger movement to keep trying to push religion in schools? Which is it?
I think it's probably a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. Okay. Certainly sometimes with legislation, what you see is, and no surprise, I think people that follow politics or state governments, or for that matter, Congress, see this pop up, where you have organizations, part of their job is to come up with bills, come up with ideas, write that language, and present it to legislators. Again, nothing inherently wrong with that. ACLU does the same thing ourselves, and so does, most organizations that everybody favors. religious. Usually when you hear about it from a lot of people, they're complaining about ALEC or some other group on the right. But truth be told, and I don't think anybody tries to hide it, this is part of doing legislative work. And so I don't know if this is part of a larger design nationally. Some bills it's quite clear. Some bills you see coming from a mile away, particularly an organization like the ACLU, where we have offices in all 50 states, and so something will pop up in Florida or Texas or something like that. And you're like, well, it's only a matter of time before this bill gets introduced in Ohio. And then sure enough, a week later, a month later, whatever, you have that bill or something very close to that bill. I have not done enough research into this particular issue, this particular bill, to see if it's something that's being proactively pushed in states across the country. But it doesn't really matter, essentially, because efforts like this have been around for a long time, whether there's a national organization or big funders or what have you pushing these types of things. So this is just kind of, this isn't a new attempt. This isn't an original attempt. It's just sort of the latest attempt, at least here in Ohio, to make what has become ground zero for a lot of the culture wars, and that's our K through 12 public schools.
Well, I was thinking along the same lines, Jack. I'm thinking about Pastor Click, and he should know and understand the nuances that we're talking about. So do you have any idea what his motivation is? Who's he targeting with this type of legislation? And then my follow-up is, does it have any chance of passing?
Mm-hmm. Well, there is good questions and ones that we're wondering ourselves over at the ACLU of Ohio and other people are wondering. With regard to its chances of passage, it still has to go through the Senate. So it's the House gets done with it, it goes over to the Senate, and it might not have as a positive a reception over on the Senate side, but I'm not convinced of that as well. I mean, the Senate Education Committee, where this bill would most likely land because it's an education bill after all, they just passed a bill with regard to historical documents and displaying them on schoolhouse walls and on school property. And the idea is that, well, here is a list of historical documents that you can choose from. You shall display them somewhere in the school or on the school grounds. But it's a list of historical documents. And, oh, by the way, one of those documents that you can choose from happens to be the 10 Commandments. It's I've been with the ACLU, and it's been almost 27 years at this point. I started back in 1995. I was away for a few years. I came back, so I've seen all kinds of permutations of these attempts and these efforts. I've been doing the lobbying work for over 15 years at this point. And it doesn't feel like so long ago that you wouldn't have these divisive religious type issues pop up as legislation over at the State House. But certainly over the past several years, it has increased noticeably where we're seeing this type of legislation introduced. And there can be a lot of reasons for that potentially. I think redistricting and gerrymandering certainly helps fuel an awful lot of this, because you tend to then get candidates who are further on the spectrum, the political spectrum, running for office and winning office as a result of the way that the districts are drawn. So with regard to Representative Click's, specific motivations, again, hard to tell how much of this is genuine and how much of it is just sort of perpetuating the culture wars, and how much of it is a little bit in between it. It wasn't that long ago, you talk to Republicans and Republican legislators, and to the extent, people want to, use the term big tent, I think a lot of the religious conservatives were something to be tolerated. And so, okay, we're going to throw you a bone every once in a while, and we're going to pass your bill, and we keep that big tent together. I think what we're getting more and more of now in Ohio and elsewhere is people that don't see this as so much a political issue, but they truly believe these things, that our schools would literally be in much better shape if there was just much more religion, and specifically Christianity in schools. So where exactly Representative Click or any other legislators' motivations lie within that kind of spectrum, I'm not exactly sure. I don't hazard to guess. I don't think it would be proper for me to guess, but I deal with words on paper, and so that's what we're dealing with here.
I got an idea, Jack. Why don't we add to that statute that they're trying to do with these historical documents to put a copy of the Constitution in Pastor Click's office so maybe he could read it and see what it actually says.
Well, we could actually make it simpler. We could just give him the First Amendment. That would be a lot less reading.
But I'm sorry, Jack. I go back to old school motivation, which it may be this simple. Re-election, like you say, a lot of these Republican legislators need to be more conservative because if they're not, somebody to the right of them is going to primary them. So they're always constantly building their conservative credentials. So this may be it. And then money. What little I know about the legislative process is through my wife, but like you say, someone will come to her and think that she would be a good sponsor on a bill for whatever reason, maybe because she was a small business owner and they've got a small business. So somebody must have brought this bill, I'm assuming. Maybe he came up with it himself. But do you know the groups behind it? And then the corollary of that is, was there other opposition testimony to it by other groups?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not very helpful for the purposes of this conversation, but, the motivations behind certain bills and ideas, I generally don't concern myself too much with because, again, in the end, we're dealing with words on a paper and what that means and what the ramifications are going to be. I also, last time I checked, of all the bills introduced in the legislature, we at the ACLU of Ohio are actively following at least 150 of them. So it doesn't give us a whole lot of opportunity for the deep dives into motivations and where they might be coming from. What makes me tend to think maybe this isn't something that comes from one of those bill factories out there and then gets presented to legislators is the bill is so simple. It's not the kind of thing where it takes a lot of technical expertise or knowledge or anything like that to craft an exact bill that can then be implemented in the way they want. It essentially says, hey, if you want to teach religion in schools, you can go ahead and do that. Oh, and by the way, here's some suggestions of what it is that you can teach. And then there's this, kind of long list about, certain historical figures and events and how religion is intertwined with it. Now, none of that, I very much doubt, if the bill passes into law, that any of that language is actually going to make it into the Ohio Revised Code, the collected list of Ohio laws. But it does certainly speak to the motivations of the sponsors and the supporters about it. And there have been other people that have come in and testified against the bill, as well as plenty of people that have testified in support of it. You get some social studies professionals that have come in to essentially say, we don't need your help. We've been handling this for many years. There's plenty of resources out there. We handle this. If an issue pops up, it gets handled pretty quickly, but they certainly don't see, that there's such a problem in Ohio that it necessitates this kind of thing. You've had some religious clergy people come in, say things to the same effect. And it's also worth mentioning that, I think when it comes to these types of issues, oftentimes it's framed as the believer of that particular religion and denomination versus someone or a group of people who are not. But in fact, an awful lot of people who have seen the wisdom of keeping government neutral with regard to religion, of course, are people of very serious faith themselves, who just don't think fundamentally that this is something that the government should be doing. In the United States, it can be, a little bit of a, it's hard for a lot of people to grapple with this because, since the founding of the United States, Christianity, of course, has overwhelmingly been the religion that people practice in this country, and it remains that way. So this idea of, what would happen if a minority religion or something started to get the same foothold as Christianity, that's just not something a lot of people can conceive in the United States because of our present and our past.
I'm happy to say my pastor was one of those people who testified against the bill. What makes me so concerned about what's going on is, I don't know if it was Representative Click who said it or another representative, but it was to the effect of, we're not promoting Christianity, we're just giving it an opportunity to be heard. And I'm thinking, well, then why don't we have a bill that talks about the positive aspects of the Muslim religion or the Hindu religion, right? It wasn't a broad-based approach to religion. It was a narrow focus on Christianity, which just makes me cringe because, for the reason you said a few minutes back, there are a lot of versions of Christianity that don't resonate with me. Mm-hmm. And so let's just keep it all out.
Yeah, and that observation has been brought up to supporters and the sponsor in committee and outside, and the typical response is, well, we're talking about the history of this country. We're talking about people who were, of course, overwhelmingly Christian, and so when you're talking about the foundation of this country and how laws were passed and so on and so forth, you are talking about Christianity, and so that is why we are doing that with this particular bill. We don't have to address what these other faiths were thinking or what their participation level was because it was so relatively low compared to Christianity. And it's no mistake over whether it's today in 2025 or going back decades that schools, particularly K through 12 schools, have been, again, as I referred to earlier, as the ground zero of this because they are government and your legislatures control government. Sometimes you get laws that are even just introduced but not passed, but it sends the message, that sort of fix this or we will fix it for you kind of message. We ultimately control a large part of your budget, how much funding you're getting, what exactly it is that you are to teach and what it is that you are not to teach. And so, one of the things, I'm sure you'll appreciate this as attorneys and everything, that has come up is, well, what about these K through 12 public school teachers' academic freedom? I've had to point out to a couple people, K through 12 teachers don't enjoy academic freedom. Not in the way, well, I shouldn't say not in the way, they essentially don't. When you're talking about academic freedom, you're talking about the First Amendment rights of college and university faculty at state institutions. But for lack of a better way to put it, and I haven't found a better way to put it, you're talking about K through 12 public school teachers. They are agents of the state. They are there to deliver the state's message. They are not to wander all around with their own personal messages as to how things are or should be conducted or what they are observing. And this is not a bad idea. I think it's always the thing with free speech is people always think of it in the respect of, well, how will this advance what I want to be advanced without thinking about how it's going to come back and bite them in the butt. So if you consider yourself to be very, left-leaning or liberal or what have you, do you want your teacher running around telling students that they should be voting for Donald Trump? And then they say, oh, I get where you're coming from. And so that's why over the years, essentially, that this idea that teachers have an academic freedom right that has popped up several times with regard to debate and discussion about this bill. But hopefully this podcast here will help put that to rest a little bit, at least. Let's not talk about academic freedom in the K through 12 schools because that doesn't exist.
And maybe for, like you say, good measure, because you want consistency when we're educating our students. I don't think it's as important when we're educating adults. So, you have more leeway there. But one of the things that Jack knows I talk about is what I consider the arrogance of our representatives, especially in Ohio. You've got this bill where they say you may teach this, you don't have to, but then it's got, 20 different specific items, and I know you don't have to deal with it, and I understand why you wouldn't, but I'm always interested in the backstory, the inside baseball. Who comes up with, one of the suggestions is to teach George Washington's farewell address. That's a very specific thing. And some of these other ones are just as specific. And so I'm always kind of like, who put that in? What legislators decided that this was going to be the list? I wish we would know, just for curiosity's sake. But it just seems to be, now, I got my undergraduate degree in education. I taught fourth grade. Then I've taught at the Capitol Law School for years. We're supposed to teach certain things, and that curriculum is developed by professionals. And I always thought, geez, these representatives are just way out of their lane, too much control. And to me, it's just an arrogance that we know best. And I can't imagine any educator saying, yeah, I need to have 20 things to teach aspects of religion. So I could see the opposition from the professionals on this.
And the professionals have to be careful, again, because, a fair amount of their budget comes via the state legislature.
Yeah.
And the state legislature, the legislators are sometimes not shy about pointing that out, either directly or indirectly. So I don't think it was lost on a lot of people that, a different bill, Senate Bill 1, that applied to, that is now law, that applied to colleges and universities with regard to how things should be taught or not taught or what have you, had its deliberations in committee at the same time that the state budget was being considered, with the chairman over on the Senate side being the sponsor of Senate Bill 1. So, it's I could see where the universities, individually would be a little bit, let's say, nervous about saying too terribly much about Senate Bill 1 when the legislature is currently considering their budgets.
See, this is what I love about the strategy down there that you wouldn't even think about as an ordinary citizen.
Right.
But these legislators, and especially the leadership, they're smart. And, they've got the experience.
In a, for lack of a better phrase, a devious way.
Well, depending on what side of the issue you're
Right.
on. I mean, if you want certain funding and you think this is a good thing, then you're probably okay with that. Let's switch to another bill because I'm not sure I really understand the...
Hold on before you do that. This just occurred to me. You were mentioning how in the world did they come up with this list of 20 things, right? So here's one. The influence and debates of Reverend John Peter Gabriel Muhlenberg and his brother, Reverend Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg, the first Speaker of the House.
Oh, you don't know about that?
I must have been sleeping in class. Now,
that right there just shows the need for this.
Okay, all right. So, you've proven
no idea who they are. Do you, Gary?
I don't. When you brought up the example about George Washington's farewell address and just sort of how out of left field that is, and I thought, well, that's one of the more sort of not so obscure ones, and then of course you weighed in with one of the truly obscure ones.
So excuse me for interrupting you, Gonzo.
No, maybe we'll have to look that up when we do our podcast on the dumbest things we've heard. There's a bill called the Charlie Kirk American Heritage Act. Are you familiar with that?
That is this bill.
That is okay.
Yes,
all right. So that's this bill. Mm-hmm. So interesting that they call it that. I mean, to me now it's taking on a certain constituency that this is directed to. I don't know. I guess maybe they think that helps it pass because what Republican is going to vote against anything that's titled Charlie Kirk American Heritage Act? I don't see how it has a lot to do with Charlie Kirk, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's another one where I'm happy to plead ignorance. I tend to myself, sort of stay out of and off of social media and Twitter, except for purely professional reasons, where I want to post something about a particular bill or upcoming testimony. But all of the personalities out there and what they say and what they do and why they're important and why people follow them, I can't sit here and dissect or talk at length about anything Charlie Kirk did or said. I think it's, again, part of the consequence of the job. I'm immersed in this stuff, pretty much 7 days a week. When the legislature is up and running, it's sort of like when people will say, hey, did you see that great documentary on Guantanamo Bay? It's like, no, I do not watch or listen to that type of stuff, when I'm not doing legislative work kind of stuff. So I'm just as puzzled, I think, as an awful lot of people where you have these, these personalities on Twitter and social media talking about this and that. And I just, even if I had the luxury of time to follow them and dive into it, I honestly really don't.
No, but you would admit, probably you know this better than anybody, that the branding is important because a lot of people don't look much past that. We could call it the "if you vote against this, you're un-American" act, and who knows what it actually says. Going to another statute, though, that this release time courses
For LifeWise.
This really got Jack's dander up.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, isn't it stating what's already in the law?
Yeah, again, it gets, and depending on who you're talking to, these things are either subtle or not so subtle. So the idea is, and for people who are unaware what release time is, because until I started working for the ACLU of Ohio, I did not know.
Sure.
And so I can remember when we got some intake from a concerned parent about this religious group that was taking their child or other children, I should say, off of school grounds for religious lessons, and that must certainly be because there's some level of entanglement with the public school that must be unconstitutional. So I read that, the letter. I'm like, well, yeah, that's absolutely right. That just can't be kosher, no pun intended. But sure enough, there's the Supreme Court case right on point in this regard. Rather, I think, puzzling Supreme Court case that yes, students can leave during the school day for religious instruction and either come back to school or maybe it's at the end of the school day, but they can essentially miss part of the school day to go get off-site religious instruction not taught by or led by school faculty, by outsiders.
But as I read the law, or maybe I'm wrong about this, but I thought that was already the law in Ohio.
Right, so that is the law.
In fact, I think it was even codified, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, so what this particular bill does, or that now law, is it says, and again, this is where the subtle or not so subtle part comes in, it says, schools, you must have a policy in this regard. Because for some schools, it's irrelevant. They don't worry about a release time. It's been traditionally, although that has been changing, it's been traditionally when you see it or hear about it, it's in rural school districts. So your big city schools, your big suburban schools, again, not so much of an issue. So so some schools just don't have a policy about release time because lots of schools don't have policies about things that never pop up, understandably, including this. So the bill says, well, schools, you must have a policy with regard to release time. I think what they're essentially signaling there is, well, there's going to be two fights here. There's going to be one to pass this bill into law, and then there's going to be that local activism and agitation with regard to, okay, what exactly will your local school district do? So they're saying not only does release time exist, we're going to tell you about it via this bill if you don't already know, that schools must do this and that they must have a policy to do this. And so, that's sort of the thinking over at the State House is we're going to force schools to come up with some sort of policy one way or another in this regard regarding what they have to do in these situations.
Gonzo mentioned that this thing really gets me. I find it troubling for a couple reasons. One is LifeWise is characterized as we're teaching, I can't remember exactly how they say it, but life skills, how to conduct yourself. Well, that's a wonderful thing, but it's got this Christian mantra, for lack of a better phrase, to it. And all these things are promoted by some species, or that's not the right word, some flavor of Christianity. And I just don't like that. I don't want anybody trying to promote any type of religion. And forgive me, I'm always skeptical about Christians because they're the most vocal and they just seem to be the most bent on proselytizing. And I just see this as part of a larger movement. And I don't mean nationally, although it may be there, but in Ohio, this is the kind of thing we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and absolutely, it certainly is, the First Amendment right of these organizations and these outfits to teach or instruct or message as they see fit. The ACLU and ACLU of Ohio's reservations with regard to release time is that entanglement, again, that we think violates neutrality. So, people will, on the other side, will say, look, no, it's minimal, you don't have to worry about it, but it's, again, you're talking about literally interrupting the school day. And practically speaking, you're talking about, well, what happens if X number, let's say a majority of students attend, what happens to those students left behind? Well, you can't carry on normal coursework or classwork because, maybe half of the classroom is missing. And so with that particular bill now law that you mentioned, again, they say, well, you figure that out at the local level, how many hours of release time, what time of the school day it should be, what day of the school day and everything. And so, figure that out on your end. And, again, with the message of, we're watching and fix this or we'll fix it for you kind of thing. But, of course, release time is not limited to, although it is, just overwhelmingly, certainly an effort by some Christians. Nothing prevents people of other faiths of establishing their own release time programs. And one of the things when I, again, went in and testified on behalf of the ACLU of Ohio on this bill is to say, well, who's to say that organized religious groups have a lock on these types of life messages and providing guidance and everything? Why can't it be done from an entirely secular point of view? Are they able to come in and have a release time program and say, love your neighbor, do wonderful things and everything with no religious messages? No, that does not exist. This is the release time when you're talking about it is specifically for religious organizations. Now, I think schools and school districts and what have you, maybe it's an open question, but why couldn't they do release time? And expand it, to non-religious entities as well. I mean, but that just kind of adds to kind of the chaos at worst, or interruptions of the school day at the very least. The idea that, well, we don't make this problem any better by introducing more to it, as a point made during the Christianity in schools issue too, and warned during testimony, because I could have seen this pop up enough, where people think, well, okay, if it's exclusively geared towards one religion, if we just add some other religions to it, then we take care of the neutrality problem. It's like, no. The neutrality is religion or non-religion or secular sectarian. It's not that, well, if we add Judaism and Islam and whatever else to it, we're taking care of that neutrality problem. No, actually, in some ways, you're making it more of a violation of the First Amendment in those respects.
As a part of this bill, was there also days that students can miss for religious holidays or whatever they call it, expression days?
That's been a bill I think passed into law. I mean,
It's separate.
We really didn't do any work on that particular issue. That does pop up sometimes in different schools and school districts with regard to religious days off. And again, that's part of religious liberty. That's that other part of it. Government not advancing nor inhibiting. And so this has been an issue like in some suburban school districts that might have, for instance, a high population of Jewish students, and so they close the school, for a day or two for that particular reason. Usually careful not to frame it as a religious holiday, but as winter break or spring break or something along those lines. But they're trying to deal with the practical effects of, okay, if we have a community that's overwhelmingly adherents of one religion and they have a special holiday coming up and we know they're not going to be coming to school, what do we do as the school? And so, okay, we're just, going to kind of take a break during that time, but not refer to it as a religious holiday kind of thing. And so one of the things, again, where I don't think schools really need the help of legislators because they've been navigating these waters for a while, but that's been a bill that's been in play before recently about, making absolutely sure that they can go ahead and not be dinged for academically speaking or attendance-wise for missing school for these religious reasons.
The reason I'm smiling, Jack, is that, I went to school at Marshall University, and when deer season started, nobody was there for 2 weeks. And, talk about, non-religious expression. There was a lot of people that just was, their religion was going deer hunting. It was comical, but you're right. There was nobody in class.
Yeah, I didn't know that was an issue. My ex-wife was from a very rural part of Ohio. Same thing, school closed for the first several days of deer season. I never, knew that as a thing, but, if you talk to people, if you come from the city or suburbs and you talk to people from the rural areas, that's like, well, yeah, It's like, well, your school didn't close for that? It's like, no, nobody was deer hunting in the city,
So I was looking at this policy where these students can get up to 3 days for their religion expression days. But one of the caveats to that was they can still play sports even if they take the day off from school. And I thought, well, you got to protect football and basketball.
Sure.
So, Gary, we appreciate you coming in. I'm impressed with how articulate you are. You do a great job for, the ACLU. And certainly I love the inside baseball talk, and maybe off the air you and I could talk about it sometime, because that strategy and those things really pique my interest. But we appreciate the time you've given us.
Well, thanks for having me. If I could mention something else just real quick
Sure.
that didn't pop up, but those of us here, with graying hair and whitening hair, following politics for a while, probably remember the failed presidential candidacies of Pat Robertson, and out of that came the moral majority, and then later the Christian Coalition and everything, and that was really an uptick in trying to entangle government with religion, let's say, with a specific focus on K through 12 public schools. And so they were quite clear, their motivations, and vocal about it. And they said back then, and during that latest uptick, run for school boards. Run for office, but particularly school boards, so that we can start to control the outcomes in a way that we see fit. And that was decades ago at this point. But we are seeing the fruit of that, and have been seeing the fruit of that for a while. So when people start wondering, well, how did this pop up as an issue? Why is my school board talking about this? Why are these issues? I think a large part of it is, again, because decades ago and continuing until now, people of certain ideological bents are being encouraged to run for office, again, particularly school boards among them. And so some of this is the result of that.
They're playing the long game.
Yes, exactly.
Well said. Hey, again, thank you, Gary, for being with us. Our thanks to WOSU and our sound engineer, Dalton Jones. If you like what you've heard, tell a friend. We want this to be more than just us. We want it to be all of us. Like us, follow us on the podcast, submit a review, help elevate our profile so that other podcast listeners can find us. We'll be back in another week or so with another social justice issue. Until then, so long.